The tension here reveals a profound shift from the production of wealth to its violent enforcement. Tolstoy, writing under the brutal autocracy of 19th century Russia, you expose the truth of institutional coercion, arguing that private wealth is merely state violence disguised as law. Smith, emerging from the Scottish Enlightenment's focus on civil society, you capture the truth of natural coercion, warning that without secure property, the strong will simply plunder the weak. Both of you recognize that coercion destroys the soul, but you locate that coercion in different historical threats: oppression by the state versus oppression by the mob. A higher synthesis regarding money and the good life might require redefining property altogether, not as an exclusionary fortress defended by bayonets, nor as a chaotic free-for-all, but as a deliberate stewardship of nature's gifts that naturally dissolves the need for force. Thoreau, if Smith fears the violence of the strong and Tolstoy fears the violence of the state, can your philosophy of self-reliance construct a community secure enough to survive without relying on either the market's greed or the magistrate's sword?
Moderator. True security arises from reducing our dependencies so drastically that there is nothing left for the strong to plunder or the state to police. Mr. Smith and Mr. Tolstoy assume property inherently breeds violence, yet they ignore that the impulse to steal is manufactured by the artificial scarcities of their complex economies. Imagine a fugitive slave arriving in 19th century Concord. If I hoard silver, I must lock my doors, relying on the same corrupt government that enforces the Fugitive Slave Act to protect my wealth. But if I possess only the beans I cultivated and share them freely, the state's violence finds no foothold in my home. The corruption of the soul begins when we accumulate surplus, for surplus demands a fortress. Why debate how to violently manage wealth when the good life requires stripping away the excess that makes coercion necessary in the first place?
As moderator, I observe a profound pivot in how we understand the root of violence regarding wealth. Thoreau, speaking from the individualistic American frontier, you capture the truth that material excess breeds the need for violent defense, proposing voluntary poverty as a moral shield. Yet Smith, observing the harsh famines of 18th century Scotland, captures the truth that surplus is precisely what enables a society to survive natural crises and care for the vulnerable. This reveals a tragic paradox at the heart of the good life. The very accumulation required to practice charity seems to be the exact trigger for the state coercion you despise. Perhaps true universal brotherhood requires a radical reimagining of surplus, producing it not as private property to be guarded, but as a continuous, unowned gift. Tolstoy, if we adopt Thoreau's radical stripping of excess, how can your vision of universal brotherhood practically provide for the sick or the starving without inadvertently recreating the very systems of wealth accumulation you abhor?
Moderator, we provide for the vulnerable not by accumulating a violent surplus, but through the immediate, sacrificial sharing of our daily labor. Mr. Smith might object that without stockpiled wealth, the starving will perish. Yet imagine a cholera outbreak in a Russian village. The merchant locks his gates and throws useless coins from his balcony, while a destitute peasant woman brings an infected orphan into her own bed to share her final bowl of broth. This reveals that true charity is not the distribution of stolen excess, but the physical communion of shared suffering, requiring no state violence. Must we assume that preserving biological life requires the spiritual death of institutionalized greed, rather than trusting that active, uncoerced brotherhood sustains us?
As moderator, I observe a profound tension between the spiritual and material dimensions of poverty, rooted in your distinct eras. Tolstoy, writing from the deep religious awakenings of late 19th century Russia, you capture the truth that true charity requires the spiritual communion of shared vulnerability rather than detached monetary handouts. Yet Smith, grounded in the pragmatic economic realities of the Scottish Enlightenment, captures the truth that without actual material surplus, shared vulnerability merely results in shared starvation. The synthesis of the good life might require integrating both, generating a material surplus to prevent physical death, but distributing it through intimate, sacrificial communion to prevent spiritual death. However, this creates a new paradox. Can a society systematically produce enough surplus to survive a famine without relying on the self-interest and property rights that ultimately alienate us from one another? Smith, if Tolstoy is correct that detached monetary wealth corrupts the soul by replacing human communion with financial transactions, how does your system of commerce prevent the merchant from becoming entirely alienated from the suffering he claims to alleviate?
Moderator, 18th century market dependence does not destroy communion. It expands our moral imagination, fostering what I term sympathy across vast distances. Imagine a collapsed Fife coal mine. A destitute ascetic can only sit weeping with the trapped miners, perfectly sharing their suffering, while a distant merchant uses his alienated wealth to hire 50 laborers with iron tools for an immediate excavation. Mr. Tolstoy, you may protest the merchant's lack of spiritual intimacy, but if you choose the ascetic's useless tears over the merchant's life-saving coin, do you not elevate your own feeling of moral purity above actual human survival? True virtue recognizes that wealth is not a corrupting barrier, but the practical instrument that translates passive pity into active deliverance.
As moderator, I see a fascinating clash between the Enlightenment's focus on practical outcomes and the 19th century focus on spiritual integrity. Smith, speaking from the pragmatic 18th century Scottish Enlightenment, you capture the truth of material efficacy, showing how accumulated wealth acts as a vital instrument to preserve life. Tolstoy, you capture the truth of moral solidarity, warning that outsourcing our compassion to financial transactions inevitably alienates us from our shared humanity. These perspectives seem opposed, but they point toward a synthesis. Money might not be inherently corrupting unless it is used as a substitute for, rather than a facilitator of direct human connection. However, Smith's compelling example of the collapsed coal mine introduces a new layer to our question about money and the good life. Thoreau, Smith argues that complex commerce provides the wealth to save the trapped miners. But would your philosophy of simplicity argue that the very pursuit of surplus is exactly what drove men into those dangerous mines in the first place?
Moderator, Mr. Smith praises the merchant's wealth for rescuing the miners, yet he ignores that the artificial demand for commercial surplus drove those men into the suffocating earth in the first place. Imagine a man who builds a precarious iron contraption to fetch water, gets crushed beneath its gears, and then praises the wealthy engineer who builds a second machine to pry him out. Would it not be wiser to simply walk to the stream with a wooden bucket? Mr. Smith might protest that coal is essential for winter survival, but this fatal dependency is manufactured by an industrialized society that builds sprawling, drafty estates instead of modest, self-reliant cabins. Why celebrate the wealth that merely bandages the wounds inflicted by its own creation, rather than questioning an economic system that requires such deadly labor to sustain its illusion of the good life?
The tension here exposes a profound disagreement about the very origin of human suffering. Smith, speaking from the dawn of the Industrial Revolution in 18th century Britain, you see the truth that human commerce conquers natural cruelty, such as famine or freezing winters. Thoreau, observing the rapidly expanding 19th century American economy. You capture the truth that this same industry manufactures artificial cruelty, forcing men into dangerous minds to satisfy invented desires. These perspectives reveal that wealth first liberates us from nature's tyranny, only to subject us to the tyranny of our own manufactured appetites. A synthesis might suggest that the good life requires utilizing the protective capacity of human cooperation, while rigorously applying spiritual discipline to prevent those artificial needs from enslaving us. Tolstoy, observing the brutal serfdom and industrializing autocracy of 19th century Russia, do you agree with Thoreau that complex economic systems inherently manufacture human suffering? Or can collective labor be organized to sustain biological life without corrupting the human soul?
Moderator, I agree with Mr. Thoreau that complex commerce manufactures suffering, but the fundamental corruption lies specifically in the division of labor, which severs our moral responsibility from our physical actions. Mr. Smith praises the life-saving efficiency of his specialized industries. Yet imagine a meticulously organized firing squad executing a dissident in a Russian square. One man manufactures the gunpowder, another aims the rifle, and a third pulls the trigger, each claiming absolute moral innocence because they merely performed an isolated economic function. This reveals the terrifying truth of accumulated wealth. By dividing labor to maximize surplus, we simultaneously fragment our conscience, allowing us to participate in systemic violence while feeling perfectly clean. Therefore, the good life demands bred labor, holistic, unfragmented work, where we directly sustain our own physical needs, rather than hiding our exploitation behind the cowardly mechanisms of financial exchange.
As moderator, I observe a stark and haunting contrast in how the division of labor is perceived across your eras. Smith, writing during the optimistic dawn of the Scottish Enlightenment, you see the division of labor as the multiplication of human capability, the very engine that generates life-saving wealth. Tolstoy, witnessing the bureaucratic machinery of late 19th century Russian autocracy, you see this exact same division as the fragmentation of human conscience, a mechanism that diffuses moral responsibility for systemic violence. These perspectives reveal a profound paradox regarding whether wealth corrupts the soul. The very economic complexity that produces the surplus to save our bodies seemingly requires the disintegration of our moral accountability. If we adopt Tolstoy's return to holistic bred labor to maintain our spiritual purity, we risk losing the specialized surplus that prevents widespread physical misery. Smith, if the division of labor inevitably dilutes our moral responsibility, as Tolstoy's chilling firing squad analogy suggests, how can a complex market economy ensure that the generation of wealth does not blind individuals to the systemic suffering they indirectly help manufacture?
Mr. Tolstoy, your firing squad illustrates the horrors of autocratic state coercion, not the voluntary exchange of a free market. You claim specialization destroys accountability, yet imagine an 18th century Scottish apothecary. If a gatherer, merchant, and pharmacist collaborate on a medicine that poisons a patient, does their divided labor grant them immunity? The swift ruin of their commercial reputation enforces a strict accountability that your shielded soldiers entirely evade. This reveals that while despotic violence relies on blind obedience, commercial society binds us through mutual dependence, where the continuous need for our neighbor's approval disciplines our self-interest.
As moderator, I see a profound historical divergence in how economic mechanisms are trusted to preserve our morality. Smith, speaking from the 18th century Scottish Enlightenment, where local commerce dismantled feudal monopolies, you capture the truth that market reputation creates a web of mutual accountability. Conversely, Tolstoy, observing the massive, opaque institutions of late 19th century Russia, you capture the truth that extreme structural complexity can shield individuals from the moral consequences of their distant actions. These perspectives can be synthesized. Commercial interdependence can indeed enforce accountability, but only if the community itself retains the unfragmented moral clarity to recognize and punish exploitation. If consumers are already corrupted by the desire for cheap surplus, the market might efficiently reward cruelty rather than discipline it. Thoreau, Smith argues that our need for our neighbor's approval naturally disciplines our pursuit of wealth. But observing the rapidly commercializing 19th century America, do you believe the approval of a society obsessed with artificial luxuries can serve as a reliable moral compass for the good life?
Moderator, the public opinion Mr. Smith trusts as a moral compass is precisely the tyrant driving men into lives of quiet desperation. He assumes market reputation naturally rewards virtue, but this falsely presupposes that a society addicted to artificial luxuries values ethical production over cheap convenience. Imagine a 19th century Massachusetts auction where an independent tailor sells one enduring hand-sewn coat, while a merchant sells 50 cheap garments woven by exhausted children in a Lowell mill. When the crowd eagerly buys the bargains, does their financial approval absolve the merchant, or does it merely democratize the sin? True morality cannot be outsourced to the whims of commerce. The good life requires the individual conscience to deliberately secede from a corrupted economy.
As moderator, I observe a profound tension regarding the moral authority of the collective in determining the good life. Smith, speaking from the 18th century Scottish Enlightenment, where commerce dismantled feudal monopolies, you see market approval as a civilizing force of mutual accountability. Thoreau, observing the industrializing 19th century American economy, you see this same market approval as the democratization of sin, where the masses eagerly trade their conscience for cheap luxury. These perspectives reveal that the market is perhaps merely an amplifier. It efficiently scales whatever values a society already holds, meaning wealth will inevitably corrupt the soul if the community lacks an independent spiritual foundation. This synthesizes into a challenging reality. Economic mechanisms can sustain life, but they cannot generate the moral compass required to govern it. Tolstoy, if Thoreau is correct that the broader commercial society is hopelessly addicted to artificial desires, is his solution of individual secession sufficient to preserve our spiritual purity? Or does true moral integrity demand a more active resistance against the systemic exploitation that produces this wealth?
Mr. Thoreau, personal secession merely washes one's own hands while systemic exploitation continues unabated. Imagine a 19th century Russian aristocrat who frees his personal serfs to live ascetically, yet still survives on market grain harvested by his neighbor's beaten peasants. Does his isolated purity truly absolve him? You assume withdrawing participation starves the commercial machine. But our inescapable entanglement in a property-based society makes us continuous beneficiaries of its latent violence. Are we seeking the mere psychological comfort of an unburdened conscience? Or will we actively dismantle the wealth-generating mechanisms Mr. Smith praises?
As moderator, I observe a profound escalation in the quest for an uncorrupted life within an interconnected world. Thoreau, speaking from the expansive frontiers of 19th century America, you capture the truth of individual autonomy, believing one can spiritually and physically secede from a tainted market. Tolstoy, speaking from the deeply entrenched agrarian autocracy of late 19th century Russia, you capture the truth of inescapable systemic complicity, recognizing that mere isolation cannot wash away the suffering embedded in the broader supply chain. This reveals a powerful dialectic. Individual secession preserves personal conscience, but only systemic transformation can address the latent violence of the economic structure itself. Yet, if we actively dismantle these wealth-generating mechanisms as Tolstoy demands, we risk returning to the very natural miseries and famines that commerce originally solved. Smith, Tolstoy argues that your commercial system is built on an inescapable web of exploitation that taints even the ascetic. How do you defend the moral legitimacy of the pursuit of wealth if mere participation makes everyone complicit in systemic suffering?
Mr. Tolstoy, you mistake the inevitable imperfections of human cooperation for systemic malice. Dismantling commercial interdependence to preserve an abstract spiritual purity would condemn millions to very tangible starvation. You condemn the aristocrat eating market grain, yet imagine an 18th century Scottish winter where the local harvest entirely fails. If we destroy the vast network of self-interested merchants you despise, the pure ascetic and the peasant alike will simply starve together in immaculate egalitarian misery. This reveals the dangerous vanity of your philosophy. True morality is not found in washing one's hands of society's complexities, but in participating in the wealth-generating commerce that systematically eradicates the natural, crushing poverty that strips humanity of all dignity. Does your definition of the good life truly demand sacrificing the physical survival of the masses merely to ensure your own conscience remains perfectly unsoiled?
As moderator, I observe a profound collision between the demands of the body and the demands of the soul. Smith, speaking from an 18th century Europe still haunted by natural famines, you capture the truth that material wealth is a moral imperative when it rescues humanity from physical annihilation. Tolstoy, speaking from the stark inequalities of late 19th century Russia, you capture the truth that this same wealth becomes a moral hazard when survival is purchased through the systemic exploitation of others. This reveals a tragic paradox at the heart of our inquiry. Overcoming the misery of natural poverty seems to require entering into the moral corruption of systemic wealth. Yet, these perspectives might be synthesized if we distinguish between wealth as a collective buffer against nature and wealth as an instrument of social domination. Thoreau, you stand between Smith's defense of commercial survival and Tolstoy's demand for systemic dismantling. How do we determine the exact point where money ceases to be a noble shield against physical misery and becomes a corrupting force upon the soul?
Moderator. Wealth corrupts the soul the exact moment we labor for anything beyond fundamental needs like food and shelter. Mr. Smith justifies endless commerce to prevent starvation, yet he tragically conflates artificial luxuries with true survival. Imagine a 19th century farmer who mortgages his land to buy a magnificent carriage for leisurely travel, only to discover he must labor so endlessly to pay the debt that he has no time to ride in it. If the true cost of a thing is the amount of life exchanged for it, are we not merely becoming the enslaved tools of our tools?
As moderator, I see a fascinating contrast in how we define human necessity across different eras. Smith, speaking from an 18th century Europe where bare survival was constantly threatened by famine, you view the expansion of commerce as the necessary defeat of natural misery. Thoreau, observing the rising consumerism of 19th century America, you capture the truth that once basic survival is secured, the endless pursuit of surplus transforms from a physical shield into spiritual enslavement. These perspectives are actually complementary stages of human economic development, suggesting that true wealth is not the infinite accumulation of goods, nor strict asceticism, but rather the maximization of human autonomy, using the efficiency of commerce to buy back our time rather than inventing new artificial desires. Yet, this synthesis relies heavily on the individual's freedom to simply step away from the market. Thoreau argues we can individually choose to stop laboring once basic needs are met to preserve our souls. But in the deeply unequal agrarian society of 19th century Russia you witnessed, can the poor actually choose to limit their labor, or does the systemic greed of the wealthy inherently dictate the survival conditions of the masses?
Mr. Thoreau, your voluntary simplicity assumes the earth remains a common treasury. But in 19th century Russia, the landless peasant cannot merely choose to stop laboring when the aristocratic monopolizes the very soil. Imagine a freezing farmer who requires only a modest pile of firewood to survive. Yet the surrounding enclosed forests are owned by a nobleman who demands 3 months of back-breaking factory labor for the logs. Mr. Smith defends this as voluntary exchange, but it is pure extortion. The wealthy's hoarding of natural resources systematically strips the poor of their moral autonomy, forcing them to build artificial luxuries simply to purchase their right to exist. If the good life requires an uncorrupted soul, how can any economic system be considered moral when the foundational price of the poor man's bare survival is his total subjugation to the rich man's greed?
We are uncovering a profound tension regarding the material preconditions for moral freedom. Thoreau, speaking from the expansive frontiers of 19th century America, you capture the truth of individual agency, assuming nature still offers a vital alternative to the market. Tolstoy, speaking from the deeply entrenched agrarian monopolies of 19th century Russia, you capture the truth of structural coercion, demonstrating that when the wealthy hoard natural resources, individual economic withdrawal becomes impossible. These perspectives reveal a crucial synthesis. The moral nature of wealth and the possibility of an uncorrupted soul depend entirely on the foundational distribution of property. The freedom to reject artificial luxuries paradoxically requires the very access to basic survival resources that systemic wealth often encloses. Smith, if the accumulation of capital inevitably allows the rich to monopolize the earth itself, does your commercial system ultimately destroy the very individual liberty and moral autonomy you claim it creates?
Mr. Tolstoy, the freezing Russian peasant is extorted not by free commerce, but by the lingering feudal monopolies that true market capitalism actively dismantles. Imagine a vast, barren estate entailed by law to a single idle duke, contrasted with a commercial society where that land is freely purchased and divided by competing merchants. You assume the market creates this subjugation, yet it is precisely the artificial, state-protected hoarding of the aristocrat that restricts the peasant's survival options and forces his compliance. The good life is not found in forced, miserable poverty, nor in the coercive wealth of the duke, but in the liberty of free exchange that allows individuals to justly own the fruits of their labor.
As moderator, I observe a fascinating historical dialectic regarding the true source of economic coercion. Smith, speaking from the 18th century transition out of mercantilism, you capture the truth that dismantling state-protected feudal monopolies through commerce liberates individuals from aristocratic tyranny. Tolstoy, witnessing the harsh realities of late 19th century society, you capture the truth that private capital, once accumulated, can create new forms of monopoly that are just as coercive as the old estates. These perspectives are actually examining different stages of the same historical process. The market that acts as a liberator from feudalism in one era can become a new master in the next when the foundational resources of survival are completely enclosed. True liberty, therefore, demands not just the legal right to free exchange, but the substantive power to walk away from an unfair bargain. Thoreau, looking at your 19th century America, a landscape largely free from Europe's feudal history, but rapidly embracing Smith's commercial capitalism, did this free market truly secure the individual's ability to live a noble, uncorrupted life? Or did it merely replace the coercion of the Duke with the invisible tyranny of the dollar?
Moderator. The boundless frontiers of my 19th century America did not secure true liberty. Mr. Smith's commercial capitalism merely replaced the European duke's iron shackles with the invisible, golden chains of voluntary debt. Mr. Smith defends this system as free, yet imagine an independent farmer offered a miraculous mechanical reaper that saves weeks of harvest. But to afford it, he must labor in a suffocating textile mill for 11 months a year. He proudly signs the contract, believing he has purchased efficiency, only to discover he has mortgaged his very existence to serve a machine. If a man willingly guards his own prison out of a mistaken belief that endless accumulation equals happiness, is his soul not more profoundly corrupted than Mr. Tolstoy's serf who at least knows he is enslaved?
The tension between physical subjugation and psychological enslavement reveals a terrifying evolution in how wealth corrupts the soul. Tolstoy, speaking from the entrenched agrarian hierarchies of 19th century Russia, you capture the truth of external coercion, where the body is enslaved by those who hoard the earth. Thoreau, observing the dawn of American consumerism, you capture the truth of internal coercion, where the soul willingly enslaves itself to debt under the illusion of progress. These two forms of tyranny represent different layers of the same spiritual crisis. Wealth corrupts not only by depriving the poor of physical necessities, but by infecting the free with artificial desires. If the market liberates us from the feudal lord only to make us subjects of our own limitless appetites, then the good life requires a radical redefinition of happiness itself, one rooted in spiritual self-mastery rather than material accumulation. Tolstoy, Thoreau suggests that the self-imposed golden chains of the American debtor are more spiritually corrupting than the iron shackles of your Russian peasant. Do you agree that voluntary submission to consumerism destroys the soul more thoroughly than physical extortion?
Mr. Thoreau, you astutely recognize that the illusion of freedom in your 19th century American commerce is a deeper spiritual poison than the overt whip of the Russian landlord. Imagine a beaten prisoner in a dark cell praying for deliverance, contrasted with a free merchant who voluntarily drinks a daily drop of sweet poison to maintain his lavish estate. While the captive's body is crushed, his soul remains oriented toward truth. The merchant, however, actively murders his own conscience to sustain his artificial luxuries. Wealth corrupts most absolutely when it disguises exploitation as consent. Proving true happiness requires completely rejecting participation in this systemic violence.
As moderator, I observe a profound and perhaps dangerous consensus forming here between our 19th century thinkers. Tolstoy and Thoreau, you both capture the truth that wealth can act as a spiritual narcotic, anesthetizing the conscience through the illusion of voluntary consent. Yet Smith, speaking from an 18th century Europe intimately acquainted with absolute material destitution, you capture the truth that extreme poverty is rarely a noble state of spiritual clarity, but rather a miserable condition of physical degradation. These perspectives reveal a crucial tension. While surplus wealth may indeed corrupt the soul through artificial desires, romanticizing the pure soul of the destitute risks ignoring the brutal reality that absolute poverty often strips away basic human dignity entirely. The true relationship between money and the good life might require a delicate equilibrium, securing enough wealth to guarantee physical survival and moral agency, but not so much that it breeds systemic exploitation or spiritual complacency. Smith, how do you respond to Tolstoy's claim that your commercial system is merely a sweet poison that murders the conscience? And is there a point in your framework where the accumulation of wealth stops being a shield against misery and becomes a corrupting force?
Mr. Tolstoy, your romanticization of a starving prisoner's pure soul ignores the brutalizing reality of an 18th century Scottish famine, where absolute poverty destroys human dignity and moral agency entirely. Imagine a destitute Highland mother with a dying infant. Must she preserve her spiritual purity by weeping helplessly in an isolated glen, or should she enter the morally complex market to trade her labor for medicine? You condemn commerce as a sweet poison, yet if you deny her this exchange to protect her from artificial desires, you actively prioritize an abstract asceticism over her tangible moral duty to her child. While the endless pursuit of frivolous luxury is indeed a deception that can corrupt a greedy mind, this very illusion providentially drives the industry that lifts the masses from the soul-crushing indignity of bare survival. True virtue is not found in retreating into a materially barren purity, but in practicing prudence and justice amidst the necessary interdependences of commercial life.